Hello, my name is Nicole Windbush, and I am a physician at the Sutter Institute for Health and Healing, San Francisco Clinic. And so today I would like to spend a few minutes talking about snacking, and specifically how you might change your relationship to snacking behavior if you're finding that this is something that's proving to be more and more problematic or standing in the way of you meeting your health goals. So first we'll talk about whether snacking is an issue. And actually I'll take a moment right now to define what I mean by snacking. So snacking is generally food that is eaten in an unplanned fashion, often between perhaps more formal meal times, sometimes of limited nutritional value, and there's a whole class of foods that have been designated as snack foods. And I think most importantly, overarching is this sense that there's often a mindless approach that we take to snacking. It's unplanned, and we often, will find ourselves going into the kitchen, grabbing something, and then we look up 10 or 15 minutes later as we were continuing to work and munching on the bag of chips, and the bag of chips is gone. And there really maybe wasn't much conscious enjoyment that was derived from that snacking, maybe questionable nutritional value, and then sometimes there can be self-judgment or frustration that sneaks in. So if any of that rings true with you and you feel like your snacking is an issue, then you came to the right place, because we'll then spend a lot of time, or most of our time, talking about figuring out your why. What is maybe underlying that drive for snacking, and then based on impressions that you glean from trying to observe and figure out your why, creating a plan, and then obviously a really important part of any successful plan, which is assessing and revising your success. So first, it is really important as you're entering a period of observation, right? You've said, I would like to shift this behavior, and I want to try to figure out what's driving this, to be curious and to try to avoid self-judgment, because trying to recognize patterns and potential drivers is going to help you create, hopefully, a much more tailored, individualized plan that potentially can be successful. So we need to have come to that with a sense of openness. Yes, of course, you're doing this because you'd like to stop snacking. But if every time you get up and find yourself going into the kitchen, and this is a chance for observation, you jump to self-judgment and say, there you go again, there you are snacking. You said you weren't going to eat anything before dinner. Then you really shut down your ability to be open to and more successful with that process of observation. And less able to successfully gather impressions. So it can also be helpful to think about what are some common reasons that people sometimes will tend to snack. Is it out of a sense of boredom or loneliness? Is there actually thirst that's driving that? A lot of us go through the day in a relative state of dehydration, and we've come to realize, or our body has come to realize, that meal times are often also a time that we have something to drink. So sometimes satisfying what is actually an underlying source of thirst can shift you out of that sense of feeling like you need something to eat. Other considerations, especially during this time of shelter in place, as I'm recording this, and even more people are working from home, often the conditions or the ergonomics that people work in may not be optimal. So if you kind of observe your internal dialogue and body sensations before you get up to go for that snack, were that you kind of needed to move, that you were uncomfortable, that you needed to stretch, and perhaps that trip to the kitchen is affording you an opportunity to do that, but perhaps there's other things you could do instead. And similarly, especially in work from home arrangements, or even more crowded workplace arrangements, there can be interpersonal conflicts, tensions, and so is going to eat something a way to kind of avoid or diffuse strong emotions after some type of interpersonal conflict, or just lots of folks being in the house and needing to find some way to calm oneself. So those are not all of the potential reasons. There's probably many more that I didn't include here and that you can think of, but that's to get you started. And then once you've gathered your impressions and maybe starting to form some theories and ideas as to why, or what are some of the common reasons you snack, or what are some of the common times of day when you're drawn to snack, it's time to think about trying to formulate a goal. And it's a good time to then really be clear about what is your intention. So if you've observed that you just tend to kind of snack throughout the day, is your goal or your intention to stop snacking completely? Does that feel accessible and realistic? Is it to bring a little bit more structure and consciousness and awareness to the foods that you're eating between meals? And we can talk a little bit about that. And it's also helpful to do an inventory of how you best respond. Are you somebody who responds good to having hard and fast rules about only, for instance, eating at certain times, only eating certain quantities of food or certain portfolios of food that you've set aside to be snack foods? And also, is your goal or your intention maybe to upgrade the quality of what you're eating from a nutritional standpoint? So those are all things to bring to account. Again, whether it's hard and fast rules or more flexible guidelines where you might allow yourself some cheat foods or cheat days, it's worth doing that personal inventory as you start to formulate your goal. So then creating a plan. How are you going to put into place some initial action steps to hopefully help you shift that behavior? So we talked about the role that inadequate hydration can sometimes play in driving a sense that somebody needs to eat something. So maybe it could look like, well, every time I find myself in the kitchen about to grab something for a snack, I'm going to drink a glass of water and take 10 or 15 minutes to see if I still feel like that's a need that I have. Or I notice that every time my back starts to ache a bit, and I'm doing work, I find myself headed into the kitchen. So I'm gonna do some movement or some stretching or go for a quick walk around the block. Or I notice that when I start to feel down or disconnected is when I go for a snack. So I'm gonna find ways to reach out and make connections to folks instead or as a first action. And there's ways to also bring your creativity to this. And sometimes that also can be a driver to snack, either in our day-to-day work or the things that we're doing around the house. We may not always feel that we are able to bring the fullness of ourselves and our creative selves to those endeavors. So sometimes a creativity break can be helpful, whether that be a small formal art practice, having some colored pencils around and doing a quick drawing, getting up and singing or dancing to a song, or finding other ways to self-soothe, maybe a nice cup of herbal tea, or to bring another sensory experience aside from eating, such as smelling some essential oils. So those are some ways to start to think about both whether the snacking is an issue, which we talked about initially, figuring out your why, and from that formulating a plan. And actually, I'm going to go back one and just mention that if after sort of creating your plan, maybe doing some of these things, you find that you still want that snack or you still want to eat something, as we talked about at the beginning, that one of the issues with snacking is that it's often done mindlessly, is to then bring your full attention to whatever that is that you are then consciously choosing to eat, and to derive enjoyment from it. And even if it feels like an indulgence, to do that without guilt, but taking place in the pleasure of eating that food. And so, not continuing to do your email or take your calls, but trying to find a few minutes to devote yourself to that experience and hopefully that pleasure of eating the food. So as I said, we've talked about snacking as an issue, figuring out your why, creating a plan, and then circling back to say, okay, what was my goal? What was my intention? After a few days or a week, hopefully tracking how well what you're doing is matching up with that intention, then assessing and revising how successful you were. And again, doing that observation to see how you might revise and refine the plan. So I think in all things, especially during this time, it's helpful to try to keep things simple. So again, it doesn't need to be an extensive multi-component plan, but maybe choosing one thing or one target, and again, reassessing your success. So I hope there was something there that you found helpful, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thanks.